There seems to be some confusion about
Power chords.
and because power chords are how metalheads communicate, this simple misunderstanding snowballs into much bigger problems down the line. In this video, we're going to learn exactly what a power chord is and what it isn't. And to do that, I need to teach you some music theory and music history. But by the end, you'll have a better understanding about music and how to write it. I made a YouTube short that for me was pretty successful. In that video, I mentioned that metal doesn't use chords in the same way that other genres use chords. This unleashed a whole bunch of people telling me how dumb I am, yet in the same breath saying things like metal doesn't use chords, they use power chords. Wonderful. But power chords aren't chords. A power chord is a name given to a specific interval that's used everywhere in metal. So what is an interval? An interval is the relationship of any two notes. It doesn't matter if these notes are played at the same time or separated. The relationship is still the same. If we add a third, fourth, or fifth note into the mix, we're now looking at chords. These are called chords if they're played as we just heard them, but they can be called arpeggios if they're broken up like this. It's important to mention that when we're talking about chords, we only consider the notes that are within one octave. So if we have the notes C, E, and G, it doesn't matter if we have just one C note like this, or four of them, we only count that as one C note for the chord. That's because it's the same note. It doesn't change the function of that chord, it simply changes the tone. And now this is where we get back to power chords. Power chords are built by playing whichever note you want, plus the interval of a perfect fifth higher. It doesn't matter if you add the octave above or the octave below, we're still only hearing two distinct notes. And any way that you might want to enhance the tone by adding or subtracting octaves is entirely up to you. But if you want to add a new note, something, literally anything that isn't one of those original notes, it stops being a power chord and turns into a chord. Equally, if you play an interval that is anything except for a perfect fifth, it immediately changes from a power chord to some other interval. So I hope that we're understanding. If it's two notes, it's an interval. If those two notes are a perfect fifth apart and played together, low on a guitar, us metal musicians call that a power chord. And if it's three or more notes, it's a chord. And great, that's the majority of the mystery of power chords solved. But there's another question lingering here that remains unanswered, which is, why do power chords primarily appear in rock, metal, and punk, but rarely anywhere else? If you've ever done some music theory study, you would quickly start learning about 4-part harmony and voice leading. This is an interesting and rich area of music to study, but it is absolutely not the scope of this video, so I'll just give you some cliff notes and it should make sense. 4-part harmony is essentially 4 independent melodies that work together to become one cohesive idea. Voice leading is the practice of making each of these melodies both distinct and practical within the context of the music. As in, each of these melodies needs to make sense as a standalone idea, but also it has to add to the other melodies that you pair with it. Now, just for context, 4-part harmony is typically music made for 4 people to sing at the same time, but it can be done on instruments. So that's the cliff notes. 4-part harmony, you want 4 distinct and clear melodies that work together really well so both the performers and audience can digest the music. Now, the interesting thing is that fulfilling the criteria that I just discussed can be super complicated. To help make sense of this at first, you need to learn a whole bunch of voice leading rules. But for our discussion about power chords today, only one of those rules is important. This rule is to avoid consecutive parallel fifths and octaves. What does that even mean? A consecutive parallel fifth is when 2 parallel fifths appear next to each other. The same goes for the octave. What happens when you have consecutive parallel fifths and/or octaves is that the voices start to meld together. So instead of having 2 distinct voices in the music, they start to be perceived as just one voice, but with an enhanced tone. Let me show you. Let's say our melody is A, B, C. If another voice follows the same shape, you can hear that the notes are distinct. But when we play a perfect fifth or the octave, they start to act as one. And just let me show you that in context. When we get to the perfect fifth and octave, try to notice how they are perceived differently than all the other intervals. Now obviously some of those sounded terrible, but I hope you noticed how only the fifths and octaves melded together so perfectly that they kind of dissolve that relationship of two melodies trying to work together. As we discussed earlier, power chords are built from perfect fifths, so one power chord next to another is a consecutive perfect fifth movement. This obviously breaks the tried and true voice leading rule that has been in place for hundreds of years, but in context of metal, it works ridiculously well. How? The simple answer is distortion. If you have a complex chord, you need to have a really clear tone if you want the notes to be discernible. However, if you have a really complicated sound, like a distorted guitar, it's best to simplify your idea so you can actually convey the message you're trying to convey. Because of metal's unique tonal palette, power chords make a lot of sense. This distortion allows for a single voice to become the foundation of the music. The added fifth on top of that is perceived as a tonal enhancement. Most other genres do not have that luxury. Most other genres need these complicated sets of rules to make their music sound rich and full. Anyway, I hope that clears things up, and I hope that you're no longer confused about power chords. If you'd like to learn more, check out this video here where I talk about how you can use the minor scale to write music.